And okay. Actually forgot to set something up, so give me a minute.
Sure. Would you like one? Did you want to clean it?
No, I'm good, thanks. Oh wait, does this mean that everybody can hear me? What? Okay, so what I need to do is keep this with me. Oh no. Oh, bummer. I forgot my headphones, so I can't really monitor if whether the audio is good or not.
Okay.
Should be fine. Dun, dun. I have that. I have that. It looks okay. Input level. Well, I guess we'll just do it more conversational.
Okay.
I don't know. So this is going to be the process of creating a login component, or rather my process of, or my ideal process of creating a login component. So real quick, I'm actually I graduated as a biology major. I actually worked in the lab doing research on cancer research. Yeah. Mainly as a technician, but I also did some of the research work. So yeah, I'm also one of those who went for something completely different from what I do now.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and well, I've almost been. It's been almost 2 years. It's been almost 2 years since I've been in the tech industry. But so I came to my current job as a web dev, but I really do a lot of front end, back end, Linux stuff, sysadmin, setting up virtual machines, all that stuff. So my experience with JavaScript has been limited, basically. And then the other thing is that I help with organizing Hill Country JS, which is this one.
Awesome.
Yeah. So this talk is basically it's gonna be kind of like a trilogy or a series because it has a common theme. For next month, in October 18th, Kevin is gonna be presenting how to test your login. He's going to be testing more on the UI and potentially the functionality. So,
okay.
Yeah, and it's gonna be using things like WebDriver IO, which uses the browser to do the testing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Let's see. Okay. And then in November, Nate Barbettini, he's going to be presenting OAuth 2 and OpenID in simple English. This is, have you heard of OAuth 2?
I have.
Okay. So it's a system of authenticating a person, which is quite convoluted, but I guess it's secure.
Token system.
Yeah.
Authenticates, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's going to be November 15th.
Okay.
So, okay. Process of solving a coding challenge. This is going to seem very time consuming, but I think it helps in terms of when you're, in the middle of the process, it's going to be more robust and less confusing at that point. All right. So the quick outline of the process is first start with the requirements, figure out what framework you want to use, then you write the tests based on the requirements, and then you write the production code. So this kind of follows the test-driven development.
Okay.
So requirements for login, the functionality. What would be the typical functionality requirements for a login?
Username, password.
Mm-hmm. So you would need a username to be the identification, and then the password for authentication, right? Yeah. And then the other thing is, this is more functionality, right? So this is going to be storing the login data into the database, retrieving the data from the database, and validate that the login data matches the one in the database for logging in.
Sure.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Yeah.
And then, it would have to tell you if it's a pass or fail when you validate.
Right.
For the layout, you provide 2 text fields to log in the password. Potentially, you provide a registration button, but that's more registration, not login.
Right.
And the actual login button or submit button
Yeah.
necessary. Validation. So this is more when you don't type in anything, it will tell you and then hit the submit.
Mm-hmm.
You should say, hey, these are required fields, right? If you have the wrong user password, then you should tell it, hey, you have these credentials don't match anything or it's invalid. So, yeah. And if you have an email login, then you should, before they even hit submit, you should tell them this is an email formatted, if it's properly formatted or not.
Right.
Yeah.
As opposed to username. Simple username.
Yeah. Basically, that helps them to correct their mistakes before they actually submit. Saves on the bandwidth and, accessibility. So for accessibility, you want to, well, for one, it's legally required for you to account for this. There are legal requirements. Some things that you can do is use label controls, like WAI area. So these are snippets on the HTML that screen readers or things like that can take and organize your website. Titles or label elements. So when you have an input, you have a label that says what this input is for. Show comprehensive errors. So if there's a server issue, then say that there's a server issue. Don't just say nothing and you keep clicking the button and nothing happens.
Okay.
validate the input, notify the user of success when it's loading, or failed task, and how to correct the mistakes. And yeah, account for screen readers, how they work. And we'll cover a little bit of that in a bit.
Okay.
So the other thing is user experience. So, for example, does the cursor autofocus on the username when the page loads? That way you don't even have to go there, click, and then type in your username.
Gotcha.
Can you navigate and submit with the keyboard only? So if the mouse is not necessary, you can just tab through the form.
Yeah.
Then should you keep the username or fail or unfailed attempts? So if the password was wrong, keep the username so they can re-enter it. That way they don't have to retype the username. Is it easy to click on the input field? So it's possible to make it where you click the label, it autofocuses on the input field. That way you don't have to have that small box of a precision when you move the mouse. This helps, when your motor skills are not as good. Is the intention of the component clear? Granted, if you say username and password, usually is pretty coherent. But some people do skip labels and it's weird.
Sure. Yeah.
And are the error messages comprehensive? I repeat that a lot.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay.
All right. And the next one, security. So security comes in layers. And by that, what I mean is it's basically a chain where you have to look at the whole thing from when the user starts inputting data to the browser sending the packets through the internet, reaching the server, and then the server storing the data. So each node of this chain has to be scrutinized and made sure that there's no loopholes. So, for example, can someone see the credentials when typed in? When you have the password as a typed text, it's just going to be clear text. People overseeing, overlooking, yeah.
Looking over somebody's shoulder.
Yeah, someone over your shoulder
Okay.
will be able to see your password. So
Right.
setting the type being password, that helps by setting them to bullet points.
Okay.
So they're hidden. And one of the user experience for this is that you have a button that says show.
that.
Yeah. That way you can make sure that nobody's around you, show it, make sure that you typed it,
Yeah.
typed it right. Yeah. Because that happens a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Fat fingers.
Yeah, I get it. I do it all the time.
Yeah. Then can someone sniff the credentials across the wire? So if you don't use HTTPS or SSL encryption, then all that data travels in plain text. Which means that, for example, if you're on a Wi-Fi, there is a high possibility of people sniffing your data. Especially if you go like Starbucks, that's pretty open. So,
Okay.
yeah. Can someone access the credential where they are stored? So on the server, when you store the credentials, is that in plain text? If it's stored in plain text and someone gets access to the server, then that data is compromised. So you know how there's been many companies where their database got leaked out, but their passwords were hashed and solved. So you have the hash. Do you know what hash means?
I don't. I mean.
Okay. So it's using an algorithm that takes your text and then turns it into either a 64-bit or 256-bit string.
Okay.
That's about as much as I know.
Sure, sure.
But basically, it changes it where you can't really go back to the text. But if you give this algorithm the same text, it will match the hash every time.
Oh, got it. I see.
Yeah.
I see.
But you can't
can't
reverse
go back.
engineer it. Yeah.
So, interesting. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. Now here's the problem. As technology gets better, you are able to.
Yeah.
Because it's always, reverse engineering that stuff is always been about how long it takes, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you have a password of, so back then, if you have a password of 8 characters,
Mm-hmm.
it probably would take you like 20 years to crack that password. Nowadays, it's probably an hour.
Yeah.
So technology has become so much faster that hashing is not enough.
Right.
So the thing that other people do is salting. So salting means the server itself generates a set of strings
Okay.
that gets concatenated to your password, and then you hash the whole thing.
Okay.
Either that or you get the hash and then you just attach the salt.
Okay.
I think it depends.
I just read about that because I was using an EC2 instance.
Oh,
and
okay.
I was sending up WordPress and it suggested changing the salt
Yeah.
stack on that.
Yeah, because then that's going to be unique to your setup.
Gotcha.
So it's different from other people's. Yeah.
Okay.
So that
Yeah.
helps. All right. Da-da-da. Yeah. And can someone bypass the login? So you have a login, but what if you just go to the other website that has all the data and it doesn't require login? Like if your authentication and identity authentication authority permission, anyways, I can't remember the last A word. But yeah, basically setting permissions to pages.
Gotcha.
Yeah, like whatever the information is protected by the login, can someone access it without being authenticated?
Yeah.
That's also a problem. Here I'm just listing a whole bunch of resources for accessibility. And the UMN homework trivia 4, that's what I use for the basic stuff, for the requirements.
Okay.
You know, saying warnings, what fields are needed. So, you know, it helped me set the list of
Okay.
requirements. The w3.org forms, and actually most of those tell you about how to make forms accessible to any kind of people. And then the main one that I'm really happy that I found is the Close Firefox add-on. So this is a screen reader emulator that is free on Firefox. What it does is basically you take the website that you built, you right click, you click on close, and that will format your website into what the screen reader sees.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, so that's really nice.
Yeah, I need to use that.
All right, so that was for requirements. Now choosing the framework. So before all this, you should have project management, figure out what the resources available to you. So time, money, and personnel. Um, with this, you can set the scope for the project, and so I listed 3 external resources explaining the differences for frameworks. And the thing is that frameworks, the slides are going to be online. I can share it. Yeah. The frameworks are nowadays. The frameworks are very similar.
Okay.
Let me see if I. Okay. Yeah. So really, the necessity of choosing one over the other is not really that big anymore.
Okay.
In my opinion. Let me see.
Gotcha.
So this is the 3rd one. Yeah. So this one says, to be honest, all these frameworks are very fast because 50 frames per second is faster than what we can usually see. Kind of. I usually prefer 60 just because it's video games.
Is the standard here.
Yeah.
50 is the standard.
Yeah, in Europe.
Yep.
Yeah. But basically, even at 60, right? If you put a monitor that is 120 and one monitor that is 60, you will see the difference when they're side by side. But the thing is that when you're just looking at one monitor doing web browsing, odds are you're not going to notice the difference and you won't care that much.
Right.
Unless you're playing video games. Yeah, then it's 240.
Yeah, frame rate's ultra important.
Yeah. And no, I have an audiophile analogy. So you can have audiophiles, right? People who love music and buy $600 headphones.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can have $600 headphones and play your music on an iPod with MP3s.
Sure.
That's not going to make a difference.
Right.
You're going to have a bottleneck on the file format.
Right.
If you have a lossless, if you have a lossless format, and you have the stock earphones from iPod, again, you have a bottleneck on your on the earphones. So that's going to be the same thing with websites, right? There's going to be limitations and some stuff just doesn't matter too much. And let's see. Oh, so the other thing is that React got, so you've heard of React? Have you been using it?
I have not. I've been using Angular and AngularJS.
Okay.
Well, AngularJS originally, and then Angular.
So Angular 2 or 4?
Angular 2, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've changed all the names around. But
Oh,
two,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know where they are right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, so React got the virtual DOM popular, and then now everybody has it, right?
Right.
So even Angular has virtual DOM. So it gets ubiquitous. Any good feature that a framework has, everybody's going to have it. Yeah.
Sure.
So like NPM, the Node package manager. That's actually, I think, an idea from Ruby, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. Either that or the other way around.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Because I think theirs is RPM. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, it might be.
Yeah. So any good idea will get ubiquitous.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah. And then, so framework difference at the DOM, right? This is to do MVC. Have you heard of that?
I've heard of it. I'm not sure. Yeah, can you explain a little bit?
So to do MVC, let's see. Hopefully it loads. Okay.
Okay.
This is selecting MV framework. So there's too many frameworks out there.
Yeah.
So what they did is,
Awesome.
provide you examples for a lot of them.
Okay, yeah.
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 But here's the thing, right? Click on React. Oh, it's saving my stuff. Okay, whatever. Cool. So it looks like this. I want to duplicate. Go back. I'll choose Angular.
Okay.
Oh. I switch between them. They look the same.
Yep.
And then, well, our pre-existing, let's see. Okay. So, let's go back here. So, I checked the inspect the element.
Okay.
I checked Angular 1 versus React network speed.
Okay.
So, well, okay, it's right here.
Yeah, gotcha.
Right. So, Angular finished in 600 milliseconds. React finished in 695 milliseconds. Barely any change.
Oh, yeah, we're not being able
Yeah.
to much.
And they're both 18 requests. So, let's see, 351 kilobytes transferred, 327 kilobytes transferred. Again, very close.
Pretty close. Yeah. Okay.
Then you have Vue and Vanilla JS. So Vanilla just normal JS without any framework.
Okay.
So this is an interesting thing. Vue has 105 kilobyte transferred and finished in 466 milliseconds. The Vanilla was 36 kilobytes, so it's way smaller.
Way smaller. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that 100?
Yeah, 105.
Yeah, okay, true. And finishing 431 seconds. So these are also very close.
Yeah.
So between these and the other ones, the difference is what, 150, 200 milliseconds?
Yeah.
You might notice it, not too much. And then when you look at the DOM, you'll see here the input. Here's the input. It's going to be, okay, Angular has the ng view, but it's basically body, section, header, and then form ID and input. So you go here, body, section, div, header, input.
Yeah.
They all look the same.
Yes, relatively.
In the background. Then you have so this is what impressed me. Vue has a very clean DOM.
Yeah, sure does.
It looks practically the same as
very much like the vanilla. Yeah.
Vanilla, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So I think these two are the reasons why Vue is becoming more popular. So I'm pretty sure Vue nowadays is the next thing after React.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's the one that is climbing up basically.
Gotcha, yeah.
I mean, there might be something else that comes and steals the spotlight,
yeah.
but for now it seems to be Vue.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I look more into it.
Yeah. Actually, the first time I looked at it, I wasn't too impressed just because a lot of your logic, it's put into the HTML. So when you iterate things, you put that in the HTML, which just
It's more like inline styling,
yeah.
somewhat.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just a little bit weird. But I don't know. Looking at this, it's like, oh, maybe I should look at it again.
Yeah. I mean, it does look very clean, that's for sure.
Yeah. All right. So the criteria that I would consider is what does the team know best? Really. The other thing would be what the framework exceeds at, only if that basically takes up 90% of your product or whatever you're building. Because it's like, well, so when React came out, it was considered amazing at huge lists because it repaints only the content and not the element itself. So it could be fast. But unless all you're doing is lists, then it doesn't matter which one you're choosing.
Gotcha.
Especially if you're doing a general type of application, do it all application, then you're not gonna notice too much of a difference.
Right.
And really, mostly just team preference because people are still using COBOL or Fortran. These are really old languages that you would think that they're dinosaurs and completely extinct, but no. Financial sector still uses a ton of this. Yeah.
Publishing uses it too, and then it's
Oh, really?
Big
Publishing?
publishing company. Yeah, so
Really?
Trying to. They're changing over. But
Yeah, but it's still taking time.
Yep. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So the next thing is iterate. There's supposed to be a new line there.
Okay.
So it's supposed to be minimum refactor count, and then prototype, make robust, and optimize. So you shouldn't just say, start writing your code and then say, this is the code. You have to be able to let go of what you wrote because odds are that's not going to be the best code ever.
Okay.
And I say minimum refactor count because that's 3 and it's not really that much. So because prototyping, you're minimizing cost, you're identifying what the minimum viable product is. It's whatever the least you can do and still allow the users to understand what you're trying to provide them. So mainly, what's the thing that will catch their attention and say, I want to use this? And then the focus is on speed. Get it done, get it out the door, show it to people. The next stage would be to make it robust. And this is where you already, people already like your product, but they want more. And this is where you add other necessary features that users request and potentially organize the code that you spaghetti added and made during prototyping. And then on the final stages, I would say optimize. So you focus on code organization and optimization, making things faster, making things cleaner, and more maintainable. And I think sometimes people, the bigger companies use a mixture of frameworks and that works for them, or they straight up switch out. Like if you are using PHP for your backend, sometimes they switch it out and use C to speed up all the logic behind. But that's, if you're at that point, you're, quite huge company.
Yeah, right.
You don't really need to worry about this when you're starting up.
Yeah.
I'm like, for that, I'm thinking of Amazon, Facebook, Google. These are people who, for every single millisecond
there.
matters.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just because of how big they are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, so writing tests. There's really a lot of options out there, and I would just say choose one. It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Here I'm going to be using Mocha.js. And Mocha, you can use it with should I think it's should.js, expect.js, chai, better asserts, and unexpected. These are all different ways you can, or different plugins kind of, or modules you can plug into Mocha. Then there's Jasmine, and then there's Jest. Really, these are basically the ones that I hear most about, but there's a lot more that people use. And Jest is the React one.
Selenium, I think, is another.
Selenium is not so much unit test. Selenium is basically the one that Kevin's going to talk about next month.
Okay.
Using browsers to do testing.
Got it.
That's more behavioral, functional, or UI testing.
Okay.
So unit, functional test. Since there's not a lot of time for a meetup, I'm just going to focus on storing the login data, retrieving the data, and validate login data. All right, let's write some code. Or so I hoped. So I went through this process, right? I actually wrote all this code. So I started planning for this talk last week.
Okay.
And I started working on it like Sunday.
Okay.
And then I got a mental breakdown because I couldn't finish it. And then finally got it done today. Or, you know,
awesome.
close enough. Yeah. So, whoop. Okay. Okay. So, how naive. How do I use SQLite with Node? When I started typing, you know, oh, I want to write this test. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to use SQLite with Node.
Yeah.
And I was thinking to use SQLite because it's a file. So it's SQL based and it's a file. So I don't need to set up a MySQL or Postgres. So it should be much faster to develop for or prototype. The problem is that SQLite actually, well, it has a authentication system, but if you don't use it, then everything's stored in plain text. So that breaks the security stuff. But since it's prototyping,
Just
yeah. I mean, as long as you're not giving it to people for them to use it, yeah. You can just tell them, use a dummy password, just test it out. It's a beta. It works like that. But yeah, so this is where I realized I don't know how to do things. So this is how I started. I went through the documentation and Stack Overflow. Typical development process. So let's see if this works. Cool. All right. So since most of the tutorials, even in the documentation, starts with how do you use it rather than how do you test it, you start writing how to use it. And you just make it. Okay, this is after I started cleaning up the code. But basically, if you if you ignore the functions, it was just running these, right?
Gotcha.
You instantiate a new SQLite 3 database. If you give it a file path, it will create the file. There's another option of giving it a string that says memory. Then it will create the file, well, quote-unquote file, in memory.
Okay.
So when you're done, it will just disappear.
Okay. Oh, gotcha.
So that's good for testing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you create a table. I have functions to delete anything that is in the table already for accounts. Then add user. Um, so this prepares a SQL statement, query, and then when you run it, you pass in, for this example, you pass in these two values, which is the username and password. And then you finalize it so it writes in. And this is get users. And here, so because this is after I create functions, you can actually call them here. And basically this generates this one creates the table, cleans it up, adds the user, adds this user, and then it gets all the users and logs it out on the standard out.
Okay.
And then DB serialize, that makes sure that it's basically synchronous. So each statement finishes before the next one starts.
Run, right?
Yeah. So the I'm using SQLite. It's the, I guess, what is it from the package? I think it's called Node SQLite, and it has another function that is called parallelize. Yeah. Let's see. Parallelize. Okay, so default mode is executing in parallel. So that can be an issue for me because I'm trying to create the table, delete all data in the table, add stuff, and then call it out. If I start to add stuff to the table when the table is not there,
right,
which is something that I run into.
Oh, really?
Yep. So, yeah, serialize helps.
Okay, got it.
So the first thing was, I wanted to make sure that this works, so I wrote this. And then I went into the test and filled that out. But here's the problem. When I wrote the test, I actually just took all that code in the db.js and put it in db.test.js. So I'm not actually testing the code that is in the other file. I'm just testing the code in the test file.
Okay.
So if I make a change on my code, it won't reflect on the test. Yeah. So this is kind of, I mean, it helps you in terms of, you know that this works, then you can take this and move it to the other file, but that's not how you want to do things.
Gotcha. Yeah.
You want to be able to test your production code instead of just test code and then copy it over.
This is, well, this is like it, so it should be.
Yeah, this is how it should be, so let me put that there. Okay. All right. So the next one is, so how do I test the code instead of testing the test, which I was doing? Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Cool. So modules. You basically modularize your code so it can be exported and imported into your tests. So we can go look at that really quick. I lost my mouse. There it is. Okay, so db.js now is exports GenDB, exports wipedb, add user, get users, and I think I missed this one, the last on 01, which is get user, getting a specific user instead of getting all the users. Let me close this door too. They look cleaning early.
Yep.
All right. So as you can see, there's no instantiating the database here. It's just the code, and I also added, you're passing in the database to these functions. So I added an index.js, which is where you instantiate the database, yeah, and then import the db.js, which has all the functions, and then just call it dba gen db wipe add user. So that's the same thing as the previous one, but separates the function from makes the functions be callable from outside itself. And this means that in your test, you are actually testing the functions in the db.js file.
Okay, gotcha.
Because then you can, it says should save username and password without error. Function done, serialized. You just call the function add user, and then you do a db get to see if that user got added, and then you assert Steve equals to the row that was returned from the database, and you make sure that the password also matches. So, yeah. Right. I also have an O3, which is where I forgot to validate users. Where it, so I added those functions. I clean up db serialize because there are, for example, really these two, they don't need to be serialized. They're just adding, so you can just write.
Any time.
Yeah, it's whichever starts is fine. This, I'm serializing one function. There's no point.
Yeah, right. Gotcha.
Yeah. So, so that's what this one cleans up. Really, just removes all that. Yeah. I also turn single quotes to double quotes. Yeah. And single quotes to double quotes.
Why did you do that?
I wasn't being consistent with my quotes.
Okay.
So I chose one.
Okay, all right.
Yep.
Makes sense.
Yeah. There's no big purpose for this.
Okay.
It's just
all right.
clean up.
For uniformity.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Because the other thing is that potentially you can mess up and then you accidentally close a quote when you're not supposed to.
You could if
Yeah.
you're using singles.
Yeah. All right. So by the end, how do I unit test? So after the O3, how do I unit test Express? Because at this point I'm like, so have you used Express before? Okay. So Express, it's a web server.
Okay.
It serves pages or whatever you want to serve, and you basically provided a HTTP request, and it will handle that.
Okay.
Now, it does that, and it's a function. So you don't really test the function itself, because you also want to test that you can get to the URL for that. So let me see. Yeah. So this is where index. So this is where we're at. This is the Express, and then body parser is a module for Express.
Okay.
and it allows it to parse the data that comes in. So if you have username and password in the body of the HTTP request, the body parser takes that and turns it into a JSON.
Okay.
Yeah. So it helps
Yeah.
getting the data back. So here you can see app get root and then the function. So I don't know if you really need this because I'm using this line, which is app use express static. This allows you to say any static requests go to this directory, find it, and then return it.
Okay. Okay.
So since HTML is static, I put it in that directory and it just sends it back out.
Okay.
And then you have post. So if it's a post request to the root, it will do all this.
Okay.
Which is, it checks if the request body is empty. If it's empty, or if the body is not there, returns a status that is bad request. Because you don't really, you should not send a post request without anything to post.
Right.
If you don't have a body, you shouldn't be posting.
Right.
Yeah. And then, if there is a body, then, well, I'm console logging the username and password. So because of the body parser, it allows you to do this because it's basically a JavaScript object.
Okay.
And you can grab the value with a key, and then I call db validate users or validate user. I pass in username, password, and it returns a boolean.
Gotcha.
If the boolean is true, then that means that it's authenticated,
Okay.
and it returns a message authenticated, and then the username.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's a status 403. If I didn't remember wrong, that's the forbidden one.
Sounds right.
Yeah, HTTP codes are usually, after a while you get used to them, but
Yeah.
you forget them.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then authentication failed. I'm sure there's another code that I should be using, but eh. And this, so if you export server equals server, this lets you, again, run it on another file.
Okay.
So this means that in my test, now I have an index test. And I can use this to make sure that, well, here I'm using supertest, and that lets me send locally a request to the server at the root.
Okay.
Right? And I'm expecting a 200 and expecting that there's an HTML with inputs, username and password with a name. So the input field will have a name of password and a name of username.
Gotcha.
And then done. Done just says that it's done during that one test. And then there's, same thing but for post. And post that is authenticated and post that is failed.
Okay.
So a problem that I run into here. Okay, so ideally, the 4 steps that I said, requirements. I lost them. Okay. Requirements.
Accessibility or functionality, layout.
Requirements, finding the framework, write the test, and then write the code.
Right.
Following those steps would be the ideal world, but when you have technical depth, when you don't know what you're doing, this will make you change how you do things. And in my opinion, this is okay. This is fine. as long as it doesn't hinder your teammates. If you're on your own, sure, just go ahead and do it.
Okay.
Whatever, gets you to the next step. If it does hinder other teammates, then just make sure that you communicate these changes so they can prepare for it. You don't want anybody to be wasting time, basically.
Right.
Let's see. And okay, here, static. Here in static, you can see the index HTML, which is just, form saying that when you hit the submit button, it will be a post request. The label, username, input with a name, username, password, and then the submit button. Yeah. And we can actually, let me see, get login talk, start. So really quick, we can do localhost 300. We have username, password, and I think if I do password, not now, authenticated Bob.
Gotcha.
Now if I do Bob unicorn, authentication failed because the password was wrong. So this is a super simple login because this code is only HTML. There's no JavaScript dealing with the front end.
Gotcha.
All the processing is done in the back end. But so one of the things is that you're not when it fails, it changes the page, so you actually have to go back. Not great for usability.
Right. Got it. Yeah.
When you click on the labels, it doesn't actually highlight the
field.
The field, yeah. So also not great for accessibility. But this was, the basic stuff.
Yeah.
Getting it done. Let's see. So here's the thing, though. How do you test validating a user or on submit if the database is unpopulated? So the reason why I asked this is because in order for me to be able to test like Bob, let me see if I can find this one. Okay, I'm going to close this. I don't remember which one is. That's 3. That's master. Okay. So, HTML index. So here's the thing. When I start my server, I'm actually adding the user, Bob, and password. And the reason why I do this is because when my test, so let's see, tests, index. When I do my test, I'm saying db equals new SQLite 3 database and then memory. This is creating a temporary database.
Okay.
And then I'm populating this database with data.
Some user.
Yeah. However, when you go here and you try to send a post request, it goes back to, I'm going to open a new one. It goes back to the index, which has DBA validate user. I'm just passing in DB, but I'm not passing the DB in the test, which means that it's using this database. Yeah. So it's not using the right database. Exactly.
Got
And this database, if I didn't have this, it would be empty.
Right.
So it would always fail authentication. So that's something I need to figure out how to do.
Mm-hmm.
If it's something where I can mock the database somehow
Yeah.
in the test file, but at this point I have no clue.
Right. Gotcha.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's
Interesting.
it's just things happening. So yeah, this is something that I would need to pursue.
Mm-hmm.
How to test validation on submit if the database is unpopulated,
Yeah.
or how to mock the database in the test file.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the front-end login component is HTML only,
Mm-hmm.
but I'll be adding other frameworks to the mix as this project matures. And you're more than welcome to contribute to examples just like the to-do.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, oh, I closed it.
Mm-hmm.
todomvc.com. So if you look at this, you can see this was created by Pete Hunt.
Oh yeah.
If you if you go to the other ones, it will be a different person each time.
Oh okay.
If I go Dojo, this is Ed Chatelain and
Okay.
Akira Sudo.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, James Thomas too. So these are all contributed
Okay.
for them. So yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah.
And this is it's a really good resource for you to,
Yeah. Yeah.
learn either the framework or see what is more performant potentially.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. And then, and for examples, I can use this backend because right now it's just the backend
Mm-hmm.
that is JavaScript. We can add JavaScript to the front end too.
Yeah.
And then, this is all completely badly formatted. I didn't get to this place. Okay, so Twitter, LinkedIn, contact.
Gotcha.
The talk is available here,
Okay.
right there,
All right. Awesome.
on GitHub. And there's going to be a link to the slides in the GitHub too.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah. And then, yeah. Questions
No,
about this?
that was an awesome explanation.
Really?
I thought it was
Okay.
good. Yeah, you went through, you stepped through the entire process, which I thought was very helpful as opposed to typically.
Just the code?
Yeah, typically it's been like, here's how to create a login.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so it forgoes the thought about the requirements or anything. It's,
Yeah.
I guess it just goes under the assumption that you've already.
You already
all the
know.
other parts, and
Yeah.
all that doesn't matter. And now you're only doing, like you said, how do we code a login?
Right.
Now that we've
'Cause
figured out that.
the things that most people will go and say, I know what a login is. You just need username and password. And yeah, true.
That is the basics.
Yeah, but the fact that you don't write down the requirements. So this is more extrapolating to other projects, right?
Yeah.
The login, fine. You don't need to go through all the process. Hello. You don't need to go through the process, but when you have a bigger project, you want to set your requirements ahead of time so you actually know what you're working towards to. The other thing is that your teammates will be all in line to what the goal is. Right.
Everybody's going to be on the same page
Exactly.
when you get started. Yeah, no, I thought that was a very helpful part of it, as opposed to just how to write a login.
Yeah. So hopefully this helps, provide understanding on really what I'm trying to convey is the problem-solving process, or yeah, like no matter what you're gonna be doing, you're gonna go through these steps. Although I didn't talk about how you identify the problem first.
Right.
This is just, once you know what the problem is, this is what you go through. Identifying the problem usually is a UX issue. At the same time, the UX people like to say that it's all-encompassing, and it is. Every step of the project, starting from figuring out what you're trying to build, how you're trying to build it, these all require thinking about user experience and accessibility. So, but you can go to the UX meetup for that. This has gone an hour or so.
Yeah, no, I thought it was awesome.
Final thought is just make things. Because I've learned more by creating this talk than what I would have learned just reading and watching videos for weeks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
So just make stuff. Also contribute.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah. All right. I think, yep, that's it. That's all I have.
Awesome.
I'm all done.
Good job. I like it.
You just came in. What's your name?
I'm Chris.
Chris.
Yeah, I was finishing up some work.
Ah, okay. Nice to meet you. Right, you're new, right? New to this meetup?
Yes.
Cool.
Very much so.
Huh?
I said very much so.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you could catch the past 5 minutes.
So, I mean, the last statement about making things
Mm-hmm.
as a tool and vehicle for learning,
Yeah.
that's one of those non-intuitive but very simple lessons, I think.
Mm,
So when you think about it, you're like, oh yeah, let me go read some tutorials, let me go watch some videos.
yeah.
There's all this content out there.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't
Exactly.
realize that until you put yourself on a path towards trying to accomplish something,
Yeah.
none of that stuff will make any difference. So,
Yeah. Especially because when you watch the videos, you just think, oh, I can do this, I can do this. It's like someone going to a gallery, to an art gallery,
yeah.
saying, oh, I could do this. This is just a white wall.
Right.
No. To get someone to pay for you to paint this wall white and cost way more than just painting
Just
white,
thought- yeah.
it's not the same.
No, exactly.
So, yeah, it's a path that you have to walk through.
Now, is this
Mm-hmm.
plain vanilla JavaScript we were talking, or?
It was more about the process of thinking through how to write a login than actually writing it. Yeah. So.
And that was a good part, because he talked about, and he evaluated frameworks, and they're really relatively all
Pretty much the
similar.
same.
I mean, yeah, I mean, your speed and memory-wise, they were real
Yeah.
Gotcha.
real similar. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Granted, they sometimes have unique ways of writing it,
Sure.
or how to organize your code, but when it comes out on the browser, it all looks the same.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And the presentation is going to be on YouTube, so you can watch that if you want.
Oh, awesome.
Yep.
Yeah. I'll post it on the meetup page. Are you?
I need to join the
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I'm Mark.
Chris.
Nice to meet you, Chris.
I ran into
Yeah, we spoke to
Mark
him.
on his way up,
Yep.
Oh, really?
and that's how I learned about
Yeah.
Cool. Cool.
his today. So shout out to Mark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Glad you came by. So yeah.
Yeah, I looked up.
Yeah. And
Get everything done that you needed to do. You think?
No,
No.
no.
There's always more.
What?
Yeah. There's always.
So I just started a new role
Okay.
Uh-huh.
with the company as a technical writer and product specialist.
Okay. Awesome.
So you start to see your business. Take your time and you'll learn the product inside out.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we want you to be the first person.
Awesome.
And I'm really interested, part of the reason why I was glad to see that still here.
Mm-hmm.
I won't be bragging because
Oh, that was the part that I felt was invaluable about this, is not just writing code. It wasn't about writing the code.
Yeah.
Like,
to get the exposure of how you think as you build things. I'm trying to approach documentation from a college perspective. It's a living thing. It needs to have that same care, thought, strategy that goes into it. And it's going to be consumed internally and externally.
okay.
And so, it in itself is a product within the product. So, having people who build products talk about how to do
Talk
it.
about, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah.
It's always a good place to kind of steal some good ideas.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
I'm all about stealing good ideas.
Yeah. Hey, that's what it's all about. You know.
So this is good. I'm glad the thing is that we have YouTube.
Yeah.
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
Cool. Wait, so what do you do?
I'm now a technical writer and product specialist for a software company.
Oh, cool.
We've got a, what do you want to call it? Customer service platform for retail companies. So
Okay.
if you ever, I don't know if you have any experience with intercom or those live chat type of products.
Yes.
At
Live
least
chat.
as a consumer. Right?
Gotcha. Yeah.
You have a
Yeah.
page, they pop up at the bottom right corner,
Right.
drift.
Yeah.
So they've got the live chat component,
Mm-hmm.
so the consumer experience is the same, but where they differentiate is it's a pretty fantastic part of that on the inside, so from the customer agent perspective. They've created this 3D environment that is basically like an AR representation of the retail floor. So say you work for Best Buy as a customer service agent, but you're working online.